Welcome to today's episode of History's Greatest Mysteries. Picture this. You're standing in the scorching Turkish sun, looking at what appears to be nothing more than a gentle hill covered in grass. But beneath your feet lies something that will shatter everything you thought you knew about human civilization. Something so ancient, so impossible, that it predates the Great Pyramid of Giza by an astonishing 7,000 years. What you're looking at isn't just old. It's revolutionary. This site, along with others scattered across the ancient world, tells a story that archaeologists are still struggling to believe. A story of hunter-gatherers who supposedly couldn't build anything more complex than a campfire, yet somehow created massive stone temples with astronomical precision. A story of civilizations that thrived when textbooks tell us humans were still learning to farm. These forgotten civilizations didn't just exist, they flourished, creating art, architecture, and urban planning that rivals our modern cities. They developed writing systems we still can't decode, built drainage systems that would impress today's engineers, and organized societies of tens of thousands of people. Yet for centuries, they remained hidden, buried beneath layers of time and assumption. Tonight, we're taking you on a journey through these lost worlds. We'll walk through cities where no city should exist, explore temples that predate religion as we know it, and meet the people who built civilizations before civilization was supposed to begin. Get ready to have your understanding of human history completely rewritten, because the story of our past is far more incredible than anyone ever imagined. Chapter 1. The Temple that Rewrote History. The morning mist clings to the rolling hills of southeastern Turkey as German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt approaches a site that locals have always called Potbelly Hill. It's 1994, and Schmidt has no idea he's about to make a discovery that will fundamentally change how we understand human civilization. What he finds buried beneath this unassuming mound will challenge every textbook, every timeline, and every assumption about our ancestors. Göbekli Tepe, dating to around 9500 BCE to at least 8000 BCE, contains massive circular structures with large stone pillars, among the world's oldest known megaliths. But calling them simply old doesn't do justice to what Schmidt uncovered. These weren't just rocks arranged by primitive people. They were sophisticated architectural marvels that predated Stonehenge by 6,000 years and the Egyptian pyramids by 7,000 years. The site contains massive T-shaped limestone columns, some up to 5.50 meters tall, featuring intricate carvings of abstract symbols and wild animals, including lions, foxes, gazelles, and birds. Standing before these monoliths, each weighing up to 20 tons, Schmidt realized he was looking at something that shouldn't exist according to conventional archaeological wisdom. The traditional understanding of human development follows a neat progression. First, humans learned to farm. Then they settled into villages. Then they developed complex societies. And finally, they built monuments and temples. This sequence, known as the Neolithic Revolution, places organized religion and monumental architecture as the final achievements of established civilizations. But Göbekli Tepe turns this entire timeline upside down. The site was built 11,500 years ago, a staggering 7,000 years before the Great Pyramid, and more than 6,000 years before Stonehenge first took shape. The ruins are so early that they predate villages, pottery, domesticated animals, and even agriculture, the first embers of civilization. This presents an impossible puzzle. How did hunter-gatherers, people who were supposedly too busy searching for their next meal to engage in complex projects, organize themselves to quarry, carve, transport, and precisely position these massive stones? The logistics alone boggle the mind. Each pillar had to be carefully extracted from the limestone bedrock using only flint tools, shaped with incredible precision, then moved several hundred yards to the construction site. Using computer modeling, research revealed that workers relied heavily on geometry to construct the monolithic structures. The equilateral triangle, a shape that contains three sides of equal length, was built using three T-shaped pillars that align almost perfectly, connecting three temple-like enclosures. This level of mathematical sophistication suggests a degree of planning and knowledge that archaeologists didn't believe existed in the pre-agricultural world. The pillars themselves tell an extraordinary story. Many of these pillars are decorated with anthropomorphic details, clothing, and sculptural reliefs of wild animals, providing archaeologists insights into prehistoric religion and the iconography of the period. The carvings aren't crude scratches. They are sophisticated artistic works depicting a menagerie of creatures: snarling lions, slithering snakes, soaring birds, and crawling insects. Some pillars even show human-like figures with their arms bent and hands positioned over their stomachs, as if the stones themselves are stylized human forms. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of Göbekli Tepe isn't what was built, but who built it. Research at other sites in the region has shown that within 1,000 years of Göbekli Tepe's construction, settlers had corralled sheep, cattle, and pigs. And at a prehistoric village just 20 miles away, geneticists found evidence of the world's oldest domesticated strains of wheat. This proximity in time and space suggests something revolutionary. Perhaps organized religion and monumental architecture didn't come after agriculture. Perhaps they came before it, actually inspiring humans to settle down and farm. Schmidt developed a radical theory that would shake the archaeological world. Schmidt thinks the temple itself, built after the end of the last ice age by hunter-gatherers, became that ember, the spark that launched mankind toward farming, urban life, and all that followed. In this interpretation, Göbekli Tepe wasn't the result of civilization, it was the cause of it. The implications extend far beyond archaeology. If Schmidt is correct, then the fundamental drivers of human development weren't practical needs like food storage or defense, but spiritual and social ones. The desire to gather, to worship, to create something greater than themselves may have been what first motivated humans to organize into complex societies. The site's mysterious abandonment adds another layer to the puzzle. Around 8000 BCE, someone deliberately buried the entire site. It wasn't destroyed by war, abandoned naturally, or covered by time. It was intentionally filled in with dirt and hidden. Why would people go to such enormous effort to hide their most sacred place? What happened in those ancient times that made it necessary to bury this marvel beneath tons of earth? Modern excavations have revealed that only about 5% of Göbekli Tepe has been uncovered. Beneath the ground lie dozens more circular enclosures, each potentially containing new mysteries and revelations about our earliest ancestors. Ground-penetrating radar shows the scope of what remains hidden, a complex that may have taken hundreds of years to complete and required the coordinated efforts of thousands of people. The discovery of Göbekli Tepe forced archaeologists to reconsider everything they thought they knew about the capabilities of prehistoric humans. These weren't simple hunter-gatherers struggling for survival. They were sophisticated people capable of abstract thinking, complex planning, and remarkable artistic expression. They understood geometry, could organize massive work projects, and possessed a rich spiritual life that motivated them to create something eternal. As we stand today among the ancient pillars of Göbekli Tepe, we are forced to confront a humbling truth. Our ancestors were far more capable and sophisticated than we ever imagined. This temple on the hill represents just the beginning of our journey into the forgotten civilizations that flourished before the pyramids cast their shadows across the Egyptian desert. Chapter 2. The builders before agriculture. Long before the first farmer ever planted a seed, long before the first city wall was built, and thousands of years before the pyramids rose from the Egyptian sands, a remarkable people lived across the ancient Middle East. They called themselves nothing that we can understand, for their language is lost to time, but archaeologists know them as the Natufians, and their story challenges everything we thought we knew about the path to civilization. The Natufians were mostly hunter-gatherers who lived in modern-day Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria approximately 15,000 to 11,500 years ago. They were among the first people to build permanent houses and cultivate edible plants. This timeline places them at one of the most crucial moments in human history: the transition from wandering bands of hunters to settled communities. Picture the world as it existed 15,000 years ago. The last ice age was ending, and vast glaciers that had covered much of Europe and North America were retreating. In the Middle East, the climate was becoming more temperate and reliable. Rivers flowed year-round, and the landscape was covered with wild grains and abundant game. It was in this changing world that the Natufians made a revolutionary decision. Instead of following the herds and seasons, they would stay in one place. The Natufians were the first people of the eastern Mediterranean area to establish permanent villages. Prior to the Natufians, bands of people had moved seasonally to follow animals for hunting and to gather available plants. This shift from nomadic to settled life was one of the most significant transitions in human history, yet it happened gradually, almost imperceptibly. But what's remarkable about the Natufians is that they achieved this settled lifestyle without agriculture. Mainly hunters, the Natufians supplemented their diet by gathering wild grain. They likely did not cultivate it. They had sickles of flint blades set in straight bone handles for harvesting grain and stone mortar and pestles for grinding it. They lived in a world of abundance, where wild cereals grew so thickly that they could support permanent settlements through gathering alone. Their tool technology was sophisticated for its time. These weren't crude implements hastily made for immediate use. They were carefully crafted, standardized tools that speak to a deep understanding of their craft. The sickles were particularly ingenious, with sharp flint blades hafted into bone handles that allowed for efficient harvesting of wild grains. Their grinding stones were so well made that some show evidence of being used for generations. Using 12,500-year-old conical mortar carved into bedrock, they reconstructed how their ancient ancestors processed wild barley to produce groat meals, as well as a delicacy that might be termed protopita, small loaves of coal-baked, unleavened bread. This discovery revolutionized our understanding of prehistoric nutrition. The Natufians weren't just gathering and eating raw plants. They were developing sophisticated food processing techniques that would lay the groundwork for the agricultural revolution to come. The Natufian settlements tell a story of increasing social complexity. Research at Ain Malaha has unraveled an exceptionally thick, well-preserved, and detailed archaeological sequence, with the site yielding a relatively high number of stone constructions, comprising semicircular and circular semi-subterranean buildings. These weren't temporary camps. They were substantial structures built to last, with stone foundations and carefully planned layouts. One of the most fascinating aspects of Natufian society was their treatment of the dead. They buried their dead with their personal ornaments in cemeteries. This practice reveals a society that had developed complex beliefs about death and the afterlife. The dead weren't simply left behind when the group moved on. They were carefully interred with objects that had meaning in life, suggesting belief in some form of existence beyond death. Anna Belfer-Cohen, an authority on the era from the Hebrew University, has argued that their jewelry says something important about social change. For the first time, people were living not in family groups, but in much larger societies. That may have led to a desire to differentiate themselves from their neighbors and signal their status. The development of personal ornamentation and status symbols marks a crucial step in human social evolution, the moment when individual identity became important within larger communities. The Natufians were also artists and musicians. When played, the flutes created a high-pitched sound similar to those made by Eurasian sparrowhawks and common kestrels. The Natufians were methodical about selecting these bones in particular, since larger ones would have produced deeper sounds. This attention to the acoustical properties of their instruments reveals a sophisticated understanding of sound and music that goes far beyond basic communication. Their artistic achievements extended beyond music. Carved bone and stone artwork have been found. These aren't simple decorative objects. They read complex artistic works that suggest a rich spiritual and cultural life. The fact that people had time and resources to devote to art indicates a society that had moved beyond mere survival to create beauty for its own sake. Recent archaeological discoveries have challenged long-held assumptions about how Natufian culture developed. Between 2012 to 2014, archaeologists excavating a 15,000-year-old site in Jordan called Shubaika 1 uncovered a well-preserved Natufian site. The newly obtained dates show people were living at Shubaika 1 so soon after the earliest dated settlement in northern Israel. This evidence suggests that Natufian culture didn't spread from a single center, but developed simultaneously across a wide region. As well as challenging the idea that Natufian culture began in one settlement and spread outwards, the study suggests that the hunter-gatherers who lived 15,000 to 12,000 years ago were ingenious and resourceful. They adapted to different environments while maintaining cultural connections across vast distances, a remarkable achievement for people without written language or formal transportation networks. Perhaps most importantly, the Natufians demonstrated that the path to civilization wasn't linear or inevitable. They showed that humans could develop complex societies, sophisticated technology, and rich cultural lives without agriculture. Their success laid the groundwork for the agricultural revolution that would follow, but they proved that human ingenuity and adaptability could create thriving communities under any circumstances. Professor Bar Yosef says that the Natufians, although subsisting as a hunter-gatherer society, used sickles to harvest wild, almost ripe cereals, and were capable of producing large quantities of groat meals from roasted, half-green barley grain. With the development of a new agro-technological system, including threshing floors, peeling utensils, and milling devices, the Natufians bequeathed to their Neolithic successors a technical advancement that contributed to the Natufian to the Neolithic successors, a technical and Neolithic successors and milling advancement that contributed to the Mayan establishment of agricultural societies. The Natufians represent a crucial bridge between the mobile hunter-gatherer societies of the Paleolithic and the agricultural villages of the Neolithic. They showed that humans were capable of far more sophistication and organization than previously believed, setting the stage for all the civilizations that would follow. Their legacy reminds us that human innovation and adaptability have deep roots, stretching back to the very dawn of settled life. Chapter 3. The World's First Cities. Imagine walking through a city where every house has running water, sophisticated drainage systems, and standardized brick construction. Picture wide streets laid out in perfect grids, public baths fed by advanced plumbing, and workshops producing goods that would travel thousands of miles. Now imagine that this city existed 4,500 years ago, making it older than most Egyptian pyramids and far more advanced than anything that should have existed in the ancient world. This isn't a fantasy. It's Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, the crown jewels of the Indus Valley civilization, cities so sophisticated that when archaeologists first discovered them in the 1920s, many refused to believe they could be as old as the evidence suggested. These urban centers represent perhaps the most mysterious and advanced civilization of the ancient world, one that flourished for over 1,000 years before mysteriously vanishing from history. Mohenjo-Daro was built in the 26th century BCE. At its height, the Indus civilization spanned much of what is now Pakistan and North India, extending westwards to the Iranian border, south to Gujarat in India, and northwards to an outpost in Bactria. The scale of this civilization was staggering, covering an area larger than Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. It was the largest of all the ancient civilizations. Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa very likely grew to contain between 30,000 and 60,000 individuals, and the civilization may have contained between 1 and 5 million individuals during its florescence. These weren't small settlements. They were thriving metropolises that rivaled any city of their time and many cities of today. What made these cities truly extraordinary wasn't just their size, but their level of urban planning. The cities of the ancient Indus were noted for their urban planning. Baked brick houses, elaborate drainage systems, water supply systems, clusters of large non-residential buildings, and techniques of handicraft and metallurgy. Walking through the ruins today, you can still see the evidence of a civilization that understood principles of city design that wouldn't be rediscovered in many parts of the world for thousands of years. A well-planned street grid and an elaborate drainage system hint that the occupants of the ancient Indus civilization city of Mohenjo-Daro were skilled urban planners with a reverence for the control of water. Every house was connected to a sophisticated sewage system, with covered drains running beneath the streets. This wasn't primitive plumbing. It was an engineered system that would have required careful planning and ongoing maintenance. The attention to water management was extraordinary. With the excavations done so far, over 700 wells are present at Mohenjo-Daro, alongside drainage and bathing systems. This number is unheard of when compared to other civilizations at the time, such as Egypt or Mesopotamia, and the quantity of wells transcribes as 1 well for every 3 houses. This level of water access was unparalleled in the ancient world and wouldn't be matched in many cities until the modern era. The engineering behind these wells was revolutionary. Due to the period in which these wells were built and used, it is likely that the circular brick well design used at this and many other Harappan sites are an invention that should be credited to the Indus civilization, as there is no existing evidence of this design from Mesopotamia or Egypt at this time. The Harappans didn't just copy existing technology, they innovated new solutions to the challenges of urban life. A watertight pool called the Great Bath, perched on top of a mound of dirt and held in place with walls of baked brick, is the closest structure Mohenjo-Daro has to a temple. This massive structure, measuring about 40 feet long and 8 feet deep, was built with such precision that it remains watertight after 4,500 years. The construction required advanced understanding of engineering principles and access to skilled craftsmen. The standardization across Harappan sites reveals a level of organization that suggests strong central authority. The remarkable uniformity of weights and measures throughout the Indus lands, as well as the development of such presumably civic works as the great granaries, implies a strong degree of political and administrative control over a wide area. From the smallest villages to the largest cities, the same standards were maintained across an area of over 500,000 square miles. This standardization extended to the most basic elements of construction. The Indus Valley civilization employed rulers made of ivory for measuring length circa 1500 BC. The Mohenjo-Daro rulers divided into units corresponding to 34 millimeters, and these are further marked in decimal subdivisions with great accuracy to within 0.13 millimeters. The decimal subdivision on the ruler is noteworthy, as it predates the modern metric system by 3,000 years or more. The artisans of the Indus Valley were masters of their crafts. The Indus Valley was entirely unknown until 1921, when excavations in what would become Pakistan revealed the cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. This mysterious culture emerged nearly 4,500 years ago and thrived for 1,000 years, profiting from the fertile lands of the Indus River floodplain and trade with nearby Mesopotamia. Their prosperity came not just from agriculture, but from sophisticated trade networks that reached across the known world. The city's wealth and stature is evident in artifacts such as ivory, lapis, carnelian, and gold beads, as well as the baked brick city structures themselves. These weren't utilitarian settlements. They were wealthy cities whose inhabitants enjoyed luxury goods from across the ancient world. Lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, gold from Karnataka, copper from Rajasthan. The trade networks of the Harappans spanned continents. The people themselves remain mysterious. The city lacks ostentatious palaces, temples, or monuments. It's pretty faceless. Unlike other ancient civilizations that left behind grand monuments to kings and gods, the Harappans seem to have been remarkably egalitarian. The largest houses were only moderately larger than the smallest, suggesting a society without extreme inequality. Amazingly, the Indus Valley civilization appears to have been a peaceful one. Very few weapons have been found, and no evidence of an army has been discovered. Excavated human bones reveal no signs of violence, and building remains show no indication of battle. In an age when warfare was common and city walls were necessary for survival, the Harappans seem to have achieved prosperity through peace. Their writing system remains one of archaeology's greatest mysteries. The widespread occurrence of inscriptions in the Harappan script almost certainly indicates the use of a single lingua franca. Thousands of seals and tablets bear Harappan script, but despite decades of effort, scholars have been unable to decipher it. The script represents one of humanity's earliest writing systems, yet its secrets remain locked away. Each time goods were traded or neighbors entered the gates of the cities to barter, Indus culture was spread. Eventually, though, around 1900 BCE, this prosperity came to an end. The integrated cultural network collapsed, and the civilization became fragmented into smaller regional cultures. The decline of the Harappan civilization remains as mysterious as its rise. No signs of invasion, no evidence of natural disaster. The cities were simply abandoned. Just what ended the Indus civilization and Mohenjo-Daro is also a mystery. Throughout the valley, the culture changed. It reaches some kind of obvious archaeological fruition about 1900 BC, but what drives that, nobody knows. Climate change, river course changes, internal collapse, all have been suggested, but none fully explain how such a successful civilization could simply vanish. The legacy of the Harappan civilization challenges our understanding of ancient societies. These cities prove that sophisticated urban planning, advanced engineering, and peaceful coexistence were possible thousands of years before the classical civilizations we typically study. They represent a remarkable experiment in human organization that succeeded for over a millennium before disappearing into the mists of time. Chapter 4. The Mysterious Mothers. In the heart of modern Turkey, on a dusty plain that stretches toward distant mountains, archaeologists have uncovered something that defies everything we thought we knew about the birth of urban life. Here in a place called Cataluyuk, thousands of years before the first Egyptian pharaoh ruled and millennia before the Babylonian Empire rose to power, our ancestors created something unprecedented. A settlement so large, so complex, and so innovative that it may rightfully claim to be the world's first city. Cataluyuk existed from approximately 7500 BC to 5600 BC and flourished around 7000 BC. In July 2012, it was inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. But these dates tell only part of the story. What makes Cataluyuk truly extraordinary isn't just its age. It is the radical way its inhabitants chose to live, creating an urban experiment that had never been attempted before and has rarely been matched since. Possibly the first city in history, Cataluyuk had no streets nor any identifiable public buildings. Yet it had a population that at some point probably reached as high as 10,000 people. The rooftops formed the primary way in which to traverse the city, and all the buildings had ladders leading to the roof. Imagine a city where you never walked on streets, but instead moved across an endless expanse of flat rooftops, climbing down ladders to enter your home from above. This unique urban design created a community unlike anything seen before or since. Houses were built directly against each other, sharing walls in an unbroken mass of mud brick construction. There were no alleyways, no public squares, no obvious centers of power. Instead, the entire settlement formed a single, organic whole, a honeycomb of human habitation that covered 32 acres at its peak. Cataluyuk's earliest occupation has been dated to 7,400 BC as part of the westward spread of settled farming associated with the Neolithic or New Stone Age. The timing is crucial. This settlement arose just as humans were making the transition from hunting and gathering to agriculture. Cataluyuk represents one of humanity's first experiments in large-scale communal living. The houses themselves reveal a society that valued both privacy and community. Bodies were tightly flexed before burial and were often placed in baskets or wound and wrapped in reed mats. Disarticulated bones in some graves suggest that bodies may have been exposed in the open air for a time before the bones were gathered and buried. In some cases, graves were disturbed and the individual's head removed from the skeleton. This complex treatment of the dead suggests sophisticated beliefs about death and the afterlife. But perhaps most intriguingly, as a part of ritual life, the people of Cataluyuk buried their dead within the village. Human remains have been found in pits beneath the floors, and especially beneath hearths, the platforms within the main rooms, and beds. The dead were unseparated from the living. They were literally the foundation upon which daily life was built. Families lived, cooked, and slept above the remains of their ancestors, creating a profound connection between past and present. The artistic achievements of Cataluyuk were remarkable for their time. The walls of many houses were decorated with elaborate murals depicting hunting scenes, geometric patterns, and mysterious symbols. Some show human figures with arms outstretched. Others display leopards and bulls in dynamic poses. These weren't crude drawings, but sophisticated artworks that suggest a rich symbolic life. For 25 years, between 1993 and 2018, British archaeologist Ian Hodder developed an international research project at Cataluyuk. Renewed attention to the ancient town led to its designation as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2012. Modern excavations have revealed layer upon layer of occupation, with houses built on top of houses in an endless cycle of renewal. When a house became uninhabitable, it was filled with rubble and a new house built on top, gradually raising the level of the settlement. The economy of Cataluyuk was based on a combination of agriculture and specialized crafts. The fertile plains surrounding the settlement provided rich soil for growing wheat and barley, while the nearby Taurus Mountains yielded obsidian, volcanic glass that could be knapped into incredibly sharp tools and weapons. Cataluyuk became a center for obsidian working, with craftsmen producing tools that were traded across the ancient world. The social organization of Cataluyuk appears to have been remarkably egalitarian. Unlike later cities with their palaces and temples, Cataluyuk shows little evidence of social hierarchy. Houses vary in size, but not dramatically. There are no obvious elite residences or monumental public buildings. Instead, the settlement seems to have been organized around extended family groups, each maintaining their own section of the urban honeycomb. Some skulls were plastered and painted with ochre to recreate faces, a custom more characteristic of Neolithic sites in Syria and Neolithic Jericho than at sites closer by. This practice of skull modification connects Cataluyuk to a broader Neolithic tradition of ancestor veneration that spread across the Middle East. The dead weren't just remembered. Their faces were literally reconstructed and preserved. The daily life of Cataluyuk's inhabitants revolved around the hearth, which served as the center of each home. Here families cooked, gathered for meals, and conducted rituals. The positioning of burials beneath hearths suggests that these domestic fires were seen as sacred, connecting the living with their ancestors through the daily act of cooking and eating. Women appeared to have held important positions in Cataluyuk society. Discovered by John Marshall in 1931, the idol appears to mimic certain characteristics that match the mother goddess belief common in many early Near East civilizations. Sculptures and figurines depicting women have been observed as part of Harappan culture and religion. Many of the figurines found at the site depict female forms, suggesting that feminine fertility and power were central to the settlement's spiritual life. The agricultural innovations developed at Cataluyuk would influence farming practices for thousands of years. The inhabitants developed new strains of wheat and barley, experimented with irrigation techniques, and learned to store surplus grain for use during lean times. These advances made it possible to support a large settled population in a way that had never been achieved before. The end of Cataluyuk came gradually. Its later period coincided with the Copper Age, which began around 5500 BC. In this later phase, the eastern mound was abandoned, and the western mound developed. Pottery decorated with colored paint, a feature associated with the Copper Age, has been found on this later western mound. As technology and society evolved, the unique social experiment of Cataluyuk was gradually abandoned in favor of more conventional urban forms. The legacy of Cataluyuk extends far beyond its physical remains. This remarkable settlement demonstrated that humans could create large, complex societies without centralized authority or obvious hierarchy. It showed that urban life could be organized around principles of cooperation and shared responsibility, rather than domination and control. Cataluyuk is prized not only for revealing how people lived in its warren of neat, tidy, plastered houses, but also for its longevity, as the eastern mound was inhabited for as many as 1,500 years. For 15 centuries, this unique urban experiment continued, adapting and evolving while maintaining its essential character. Today, as we grapple with questions of sustainable urban development and community organization, Cataluyuk offers profound lessons. It reminds us that there are many ways to organize human settlements, and that some of the most successful experiments in communal living took place not in the modern world, but in the distant past. The rooftop city of Cataluyuk stands as testimony to human creativity and adaptability, showing us that our ancestors were capable of imagining and creating social arrangements that we are only beginning to understand. Chapter 5. Jericho. 10,000 years ago, when most of humanity still lived in temporary camps and followed animal herds across endless landscapes, something extraordinary was happening in the Jordan Valley. In a place where an ancient spring bubbled up from the earth, providing life-giving water in an otherwise harsh landscape, a group of hunter-gatherers made a decision that would echo through history. They decided to stay. Founded sometime around 9000 BC, Jericho remains one of the oldest continually settled cities on Earth. It is thought that the early years of this settlement began as a base of operations for semi-nomadic hunter and gatherers. As new farming techniques were introduced into the area, Jericho started to take shape in 8000 BC. What began as a seasonal camp beside the spring of Ain-e-Sultan would grow into humanity as first walled city, a fortress that would defend its inhabitants for millennia and become one of the most enduring settlements in human history. The location was no accident. Located 258 meters below sea level in the Jordan Valley, the city is the lowest-lying settlement in the world. Its fertile lands, abundant water sources, and warm climate have attracted people for thousands of years, making it a continuous settlement throughout history. The spring of Ain-e-Sultan provided a reliable water source in a region where water was scarce and precious, creating an oasis that could support permanent habitation. Pre-pottery Neolithic, at Jericho, was the site of a large settlement with a dense population as early as the 9th millennium BC. with estimates of the settlement's population ranging from 2,000–3,000 to only 200 to 300. Even by the most conservative estimates, this represented an unprecedented concentration of people for its time. For comparison, most contemporary settlements consisted of perhaps a few dozen individuals living in temporary shelters. The village began with small circular dwellings, burials in the floors of the buildings, the cultivation of wild grains, and the use of no pottery. Buildings were made of clay and straw bricks, held together by mud dried in the sun. By 9400 BCE, the town had more than 70 of these dwellings, with more than 1,000 inhabitants. This growth rate was remarkable for its time, representing the successful transition from mobile to sedentary life. But what truly sets Jericho apart in the annals of human history is its wall. Most interesting to archaeologists is the evidence for a stone wall over 3.5 meters high and a tower of equal height. This wasn't just any wall. It was humanity's first serious attempt at urban fortification, the ancestor of every city wall that would follow. The wall was 3 meters wide and 4 meters tall, representing a massive investment of labor and resources for a small community. The Tower of Jericho stands as one of humanity's oldest monumental buildings. The tower required substantial communal effort to build, with an estimated 10,400 working days invested in the construction of the tower. This massive stone structure, 8 meters high and built around 8000 BC, may have functioned as part of a fortification system, a flood detection system, or as a symbolic monument to motivate people to take part in a communal lifestyle. The construction of these defenses reveals sophisticated planning and organization. The tower may also have been an indication of power struggles within the community, as an individual or a group may have exploited the primeval fears of the residents and persuaded them to build it. There is also evidence of human violence at the site, as the skeletons of 12 people apparently killed in a fight or riot have been found within the tower. These discoveries suggest that even in humanity's earliest cities, questions of power, authority, and conflict were already emerging. The walls of Jericho tell a story of repeated destruction and reconstruction. Jericho was famous for its great walls. The presence of walls would suggest that Jericho was often attacked or besieged by neighboring kingdoms and nomads in the region. New archaeological findings have discovered that the walls around Jericho were destroyed and rebuilt numerous times. This cycle of destruction and renewal would continue for millennia, with each generation rebuilding and strengthening their defenses. The agricultural revolution that enabled Jericho's growth was as significant as its architectural achievements. Its proximity to fresh water from the spring at Ain Sultan facilitated the early development of animal husbandry and agriculture, making the site among the most advanced centers of the Neolithic revolution in the Fertile Crescent. The inhabitants learned to cultivate wild grains, gradually developing the techniques that would spread across the world and transform human society. Across the millennium, dozens of new groups both arrived and left Jericho, with each new arrival bringing something new in terms of culture and technology. Early forms of pottery have been uncovered here that are nearly 6,000 years old. The city became a crossroads of innovation, where new ideas and technologies were tested, refined, and disseminated to other settlements. The first excavations in Jericho began in 1868 under the guidance of Charles Warren, focusing on the mound known as Tel es-Sultan. Ongoing excavations have led archaeologists to uncover more than 20 different settlement layers, dating back as far as 11,000 years. Each layer tells the story of a different period in the city's long history, revealing how life changed and evolved over the millennia. The site was built over an area of 2 or 3 hectares, and its most notable features include stone walls and the oldest known monumental building, the Tower of Jericho. Despite its modest size by modern standards, Jericho was revolutionary in its time. It demonstrated that humans could create permanent settlements, defend them against threats, and maintain them across generations. The end of Neolithic Jericho came suddenly and dramatically. In 6000 BC, a major earthquake shifted or interrupted the spring of Ain Sultan, likely causing the end of Neolithic Jericho. When the water supply that had sustained the city for thousands of years was disrupted, the settlement could no longer support its population. This natural disaster highlights the vulnerability of even the most successful early settlements to environmental changes. But Jericho's story didn't end with the earthquake. The site would be resettled again and again throughout history, each new wave of inhabitants drawn by the same advantages that had attracted the first settlers. The spring would eventually resume flowing, and new cities would rise on the ruins of the old ones. Jericho is perhaps most famous for its appearance in the Bible as the first city that was conquered by the Israelites under the command of Joshua. Jericho was a significant city in biblical times and would remain notable even under Roman rule. The biblical account of Jericho's walls falling to the sound of trumpets has made the city famous far beyond archaeological circles, embedding it in the cultural memory of billions of people. The archaeological reality of biblical Jericho remains a subject of debate. While the ancient walls certainly existed and were repeatedly destroyed and rebuilt, connecting specific destructions to biblical events requires careful analysis of dates and contexts. What is clear is that Jericho's strategic importance and repeated cycles of destruction and reconstruction made it a natural choice for biblical narratives about conquest and divine intervention. Continuously inhabited for thousands of years, Jericho is one of the first walled cities in history and has hosted many civilizations. In 2008, it was recognized by UNESCO as one of the oldest cities in the world and placed under protection. Today, the ancient tale of Jericho stands as a monument to human persistence and adaptability. The legacy of Jericho extends far beyond its physical remains. As humanity's first walled city, it established principles of urban defense that would be copied and refined for millennia. More importantly, it demonstrated that permanent settlement was not only possible but advantageous, providing security, continuity, and the stability necessary for technological and cultural advancement. Standing today among the ruins of ancient Jericho, visitors can see the remains of humanity's first great urban experiment. The massive stones of the tower still stand, weathered by 10,000 years but unbroken. The spring still flows, as it has for millennia, a reminder that the fundamental requirements of human settlement, water, security, and community remain unchanged across the vast sweep of history. Chapter 6: The Genius of Ancient Engineering. Long before the Romans perfected their aqueducts, before the Greeks calculated the proportions of the Parthenon, and thousands of years before modern engineers learned to design skyscrapers, ancient civilizations were solving complex engineering problems with an ingenuity that still amazes us today. From the precisely calibrated water systems of the Indus Valley to the astronomical alignments of Göbekli Tepe, these forgotten engineers created works that reveal a depth of knowledge we're only beginning to appreciate. The engineering achievements of the Indus Valley civilization represent perhaps the most sophisticated urban planning of the ancient world. The cities of the ancient Indus had social hierarchies, their writing system, their large planned cities, and their long-distance trade, which marked them to archaeologists as a full-fledged civilization. But it was their engineering that truly set them apart from their contemporaries. Consider the water management systems of Mohenjo-Daro. Because of the large number of wells, it is believed that the inhabitants relied solely on annual rainfall, as well as the Indus River's course remaining close to the site alongside the wells providing water for long periods of time in the case of the city coming under siege. This redundant system of water supply, wells, river access, and rainwater collection represented sophisticated planning for multiple contingencies. The precision of Harappan engineering is evident in their smallest tools. A ruler found at Lothal, 2400 BCE, is calibrated to about 1.6 millimeters. A piece of shell found in Mackay's excavation is very precisely incised with lines spaced 6.7 millimeters apart. Ancient bricks found throughout the region have dimensions that correspond to these units. This level of standardization required not just advanced mathematics, but also quality control systems that ensured consistency across vast distances and long periods of time. The sewage systems of the Indus Valley cities were unmatched in the ancient world. Every house was connected to covered drains that ran beneath the streets, collecting waste and rainwater and carrying it away from residential areas. These weren't simple ditches, but engineered systems with gradients calculated to ensure proper flow, access points for maintenance, and settling basins to prevent blockages. But perhaps most impressive was their understanding of material science. The Great Bath at Mohenjo-daro was made watertight using a sophisticated combination of baked bricks, gypsum mortar, and a layer of natural tar. After 4,500 years, this massive structure still holds water, testament to the engineering knowledge of its builders. The construction required understanding not just of structural engineering but of chemistry and material properties. Moving north to Anatolia, the engineers of Cataluyuk faced different challenges and developed different solutions. Devices known from Persia as wind catchers were attached to the roofs of some buildings, which provided air conditioning for the home or administrative office. These passive cooling systems demonstrate sophisticated understanding of thermodynamics and airflow, creating comfortable interior temperatures without mechanical systems. The rooftop-based circulation system of Cataluyuk required careful structural engineering. Houses had to be built strong enough to support not just their own roofs, but also the weight of people constantly walking on them. The walls were thick and well constructed, using a post and beam system that distributed weight evenly. The ladders providing access from rooftop to interior were precisely positioned to ensure safe and convenient movement throughout the city. At Göbekli Tepe, the engineering challenges were of an entirely different magnitude. The megalithic structures themselves testify to new levels of architectural and engineering technology. Moving stones weighing up to 20 tons without metal tools, wheeled vehicles, or domesticated animals required innovative solutions that we can only partially reconstruct. The quarrying techniques at Göbekli Tepe were remarkably sophisticated. The plateau Göbekli Tepe is situated on has been shaped by erosion and quarrying from the Neolithic onwards. Most structures on the plateau seem to result from Neolithic quarrying, with the quarries being used as sources for the huge, monolithic architectural elements. Their profiles were pecked into the rock, with the detached blocks then levered out of the rock bank. The precision of the stone cutting at Göbekli Tepe rivals that of much later civilizations. The T-shaped pillars were carved with incredible accuracy, with smooth surfaces and precise angles that required advanced understanding of stone working techniques. The relief carvings show sophisticated artistic skill, but they also demonstrate technical mastery of tools and techniques. The architectural planning at Göbekli Tepe reveals advanced mathematical knowledge. Using computer modeling, research revealed that workers relied heavily on geometry to construct the monolithic structures. The identification of a geometric pattern based on an equilateral triangle that regulated the position of the three enclosures, and their architectural elements suggest that the builders possessed sophisticated knowledge of geometry and could apply it to large-scale construction projects. At Jericho, the engineering achievement was the development of defensive architecture. The Tower of Jericho represents humanity's first serious attempt at monumental construction, requiring coordination of hundreds of workers and sophisticated planning to ensure structural stability. The foundation had to be carefully prepared, the stones precisely fitted, and the overall structure designed to withstand both human attacks and natural forces. The water management at Jericho was equally impressive. The settlement was built around the spring of Ain Sultan, but simply having water wasn't enough. It had to be managed and distributed throughout the growing community. Archaeological evidence suggests that the early inhabitants developed systems for channeling and storing water, ensuring that the precious resource reached all parts of the settlement. The Natufians, though they built smaller structures, were equally innovative in their engineering solutions. The semicircular and circular semi-subterranean buildings at sites like Ain and Malaha required careful excavation and stone placement. These structures had to be designed to be warm in winter and cool in summer, dry during rains, and stable despite being partially underground. The tool technology developed by these ancient engineers was remarkable in its sophistication. The Natufian sickles, with their precisely shaped flint blades hafted into bone handles, required understanding of ergonomics, material science, and manufacturing techniques. The grinding stones they created were so well engineered that they could be used for generations without significant wear. Perhaps most impressive was the knowledge transfer systems that allowed these engineering innovations to spread. The remarkable uniformity of weights and measures throughout the Indus lands, as well as the development of such presumably civic works as the great granaries, implies a strong degree of political and administrative control over a wide area. This standardization required not just advanced engineering, but also sophisticated systems for training craftsmen and ensuring quality control. The legacy of these ancient engineers extends far beyond their immediate achievements. The principles they developed, standardization, redundancy in critical systems, attention to materials properties, and integration of form and function, remain fundamental to modern engineering. Their solutions to problems of water management, structural stability, and urban planning continue to influence how we design and build today. These forgotten engineers worked without the mathematical tools we take for granted, without mechanical aids for calculation, and without the accumulated knowledge of millennia of technological development. Yet they created works that have endured for thousands of years, solving problems that would challenge even modern engineers. Their achievements remind us that engineering excellence isn't just about having the latest technology. It is about understanding fundamental principles, thinking creatively about problems, and executing solutions with precision and care. The ancient engineers who built the first cities, carved the first monuments, and designed the first urban systems laid the foundation for all technological progress that followed. Standing among the ruins of these ancient achievements, we're reminded that human ingenuity has deep roots. The engineers of Mohenjo-daro, Göbekli Tepe, Cataluyuk, and Jericho may have worked with stone tools and human muscle, but their minds were every bit as sharp as those of today's engineers. Their legacy lives on not just in the monuments they built, but in the principles they established and the inspiration they continue to provide. Chapter 7. The Art and Culture. In the sterile world of archaeological textbooks, ancient civilizations are often reduced to pottery shards, building foundations, and tool fragments. But beneath the accumulated dust of millennia lies evidence of something far more profound: rich artistic traditions, complex spiritual beliefs, and sophisticated cultural practices that reveal the full humanity of our ancient ancestors. These forgotten artists and artisans created works of stunning beauty and profound meaning, challenging our assumptions about the creative capabilities of prehistoric peoples. At Göbekli Tepe, the artistic achievements are as remarkable as the engineering feats. Many of these pillars are decorated with anthropomorphic details, clothing, and sculptural reliefs of wild animals, providing archaeologists insights into prehistoric religion and the iconography of the period. These aren't crude scratches or simple symbolic marks. They are sophisticated artistic compositions that demonstrate advanced understanding of form, proportion, and narrative. The animal reliefs at Göbekli Tepe form a prehistoric bestiary of extraordinary complexity. The carvings include lions with bared fangs, snakes coiled around pillar bases, wild boars with prominent tusks, foxes in hunting poses, gazelles in mid-leap, and birds with outstretched wings. Each animal is rendered with careful attention to anatomical detail and dynamic movement, suggesting that the artists had intimate knowledge of animal behavior and exceptional skill in stone carving. But the most intriguing figures are the anthropomorphic pillars themselves. Some of the pillars, which are abstract depictions of the human form, also feature low reliefs of items of clothing, e.g., belts and loincloths, as well as high and low reliefs of wild animals. These T-shaped monoliths appear to represent stylized human figures, with the horizontal stone forming arms and shoulders, while the vertical shaft represents the body. The addition of clothing details transforms these architectural elements into portrait sculptures of unprecedented size and sophistication. The symbolism embedded in Göbekli Tepe's art suggests complex mythological and religious systems. The imagery found at Göbekli Tepe, adorning to pillars and some small finds, stone vessels, shaft straighteners, etc., is also found at contemporaneous sites in the upper Mesopotamian region, thus testifying to a close social network in this core region of Neolithization. This widespread artistic language indicates shared beliefs and cultural practices across vast distances. Moving to the Indus Valley, we encounter an entirely different but equally sophisticated artistic tradition. The level of artistic skill is evident through numerous finds of statuary, soapstone seals, ceramics, and jewelry. The most famous artwork is the bronze statuette, standing 4 inches, 10 centimeters tall, known as Dancing Girl, found at Mohenjo-Daro in 1926 CE. This small sculpture captures a moment of perfect poise and attitude, with the figure's right hand on her hip, left on her knee, with chin raised as though evaluating the claims of a suitor. The Dancing Girl represents a triumph of bronze casting technology and artistic vision. The figure's naturalistic proportions, confident posture, and individualized features suggest that Harappan artists were skilled portraitists who could capture both physical likeness and personality in their work. The sculpture, a sophisticated pose, and the artist's ability to convey movement in static bronze demonstrate artistic achievements that wouldn't be surpassed for centuries. Equally impressive is the soapstone figure, 6 inches 17 centimeters tall, known as the Priest King, depicting a bearded man wearing a headdress and ornamental armband. This sculpture demonstrates the Harappan mastery of different materials and techniques. The careful modeling of facial features, the precise rendering of textile patterns, and the attention to decorative details reveal an artistic tradition of remarkable sophistication. The Harappan seals represent perhaps the most intriguing artistic legacy of the Indus Valley. A particularly interesting aspect of the artwork is the appearance of what seems to be a unicorn on over 60% of the personal seals. There are many different images on these seals, but the unicorn appears on 1156 seals and sealings out of a total of 1755 found at mature Harappan sites. This consistent iconography suggests that the unicorn held special significance in Harappan culture, possibly representing a deity, clan totem, or mythological figure. The Pashupati seal represents the pinnacle of Harappan artistic achievement. This remarkable archaeological find dates back to 2300 BCE and depicts a captivating, seated figure adorned with a striking horned headdress and 3 heads that closely resemble the Hindu deity, Shiva. With arms resting on its knees, the figure suggests a meditative position, and the design is further enriched by an impressive collection of animals surrounding it, including an elephant, tiger, rhinoceros, and buffalo. At Cataluyuk, artistic expression took different forms but was no less sophisticated. The walls of many houses were decorated with elaborate murals depicting hunting scenes, geometric patterns, and mysterious symbols. These paintings weren't simple decorations, but complex narrative compositions that may have told stories, recorded important events, or illustrated religious beliefs. The artistic program at Cataluyuk extended beyond wall paintings to include sculptural works. Some skulls were plastered and painted with ochre to recreate faces, a custom more characteristic of Neolithic sites in Syria and Neolithic Jericho than at sites closer by. This practice of facial reconstruction suggests sophisticated understanding of anatomy and artistic techniques for preserving and honoring the dead. The female figurines found at Cataluyuk reveal important aspects of the settlement's spiritual life. Sculptures and figurines depicting women have been observed as part of Harappan culture and religion, as multiple female pieces were recovered from Marshall's archaeological digs. Many of these figurines appear to represent fertility goddesses or mother figures, suggesting that feminine principles played central roles in Cataluyuk's religious beliefs. The Natufians developed their own distinctive artistic traditions that reflected their unique lifestyle and beliefs. Carved bone and stone artwork have been found. These works demonstrate that even mobile hunter-gatherer societies could develop sophisticated artistic traditions. The Natufians created jewelry, decorated tools, and sculptural objects that reveal aesthetic sensibilities and artistic skills. Natufian art, it is believed, was linked to the practice of rituals and ceremonies. In their newly settled hamlets, the Natufians may have used their superbly carved sculptures, animal figurines, and jewelry to represent beliefs commonly held across communities, and to differentiate status among individual community members. Art served not just aesthetic purposes, but social and religious functions. The musical traditions of these ancient peoples add another dimension to their cultural achievements. The Natufians created sophisticated musical instruments. When played, the flutes created a high-pitched sound similar to those made by Eurasian sparrowhawks and common kestrels. The Natufians were methodical about selecting these bones in particular, since larger ones would have produced deeper sounds. This attention to acoustical properties reveals understanding of sound production and musical theory. The artistic legacy of these civilizations extends beyond individual objects to encompass entire aesthetic systems. The emergence of Natufian art in the Levant, where previously almost none had existed, appears to indicate a shared ideology and visual culture that probably derived from the Natufians' shared environment and newfound life as settled hunters and gatherers. Art became a means of cultural identity and social cohesion. The techniques developed by these ancient artists were remarkably advanced. The bronze casting technology that produced the dancing girl required sophisticated understanding of metallurgy, mold making, and finishing techniques. The stone carving at Göbekli Tepe demanded precision tools and exceptional skill. The wall paintings at Cataluyuk required pigment preparation, surface preparation, and advanced painting techniques. Perhaps most importantly, the art of these civilizations reveals their capacity for abstract thought and symbolic communication. The consistent iconography across Harappan seals, the complex symbolism at Göbekli Tepe, and the narrative murals at Cataluyuk all demonstrate that these peoples possessed sophisticated systems of meaning and representation. The preservation of these artistic achievements allows us to connect with our ancient ancestors in ways that purely utilitarian artifacts cannot. When we look at the confident pose of the dancing girl or the mysterious symbols carved into the pillars of Göbekli Tepe, we're seeing not just ancient objects but expressions of human creativity, spirituality, and meaning-making that bridge the vast gap of time. These artistic traditions remind us that the drive to create beauty, to express complex ideas through visual means, and to leave lasting monuments to human creativity has been with us from the very beginning of settled life. The forgotten artists of these ancient civilizations were our creative ancestors, establishing traditions and achieving levels of excellence that continue to inspire and amaze us today. Chapter 8. The Spiritual Revolution. Before there were temples with golden domes reaching toward heaven, before priests chanted in sacred languages, and long before religious texts were written on papyrus or stone, something profound was happening in the spiritual lives of our earliest ancestors. The civilizations that emerged before the pyramids weren't just building cities and developing technologies. They were undergoing a spiritual revolution that would fundamentally shape how humans understood their place in the cosmos. At the heart of this revolution stands Göbekli Tepe, which many scholars now believe to be the world's first temple. Schmidt thinks the temple itself, built after the end of the last ice age by hunter-gatherers, became that ember, the spark that launched mankind toward farming, urban life, and all that followed. This radical theory suggests that religion didn't emerge from settled agricultural life. Instead, religion inspired humans to settle down and develop agriculture. The implications of this reversal are staggering. If Schmidt is correct, then the earliest human impulse toward civilization wasn't driven by practical needs like food security or defense, but by spiritual yearning, the desire to gather, worship, and create something sacred. Religion now appears so early in civilized life, earlier than civilized life, if Schmidt is correct, that some think it may be less a product of culture than a cause of it, less a revelation than a genetic inheritance. The spiritual practices at Göbekli Tepe involved complex rituals that we can only begin to understand. Archaeological analysis shows that gazelle were only seasonally present in the region, suggesting that events such as rituals and feasts were likely timed to occur during periods when game availability was at its peak. These gatherings weren't casual affairs, but carefully planned ceremonies that required coordination across multiple hunter-gatherer groups. Schmidt also speculated on the belief systems of the groups that created Göbekli Tepe, based on comparisons with other shrines and settlements. He presumed shamanic practices. The T-shaped pillars represent human forms, perhaps ancestors. This ancestral interpretation suggests that the spiritual practices at Göbekli Tepe involved communion with the dead, with the massive stone pillars serving as eternal monuments to revered ancestors. The animal symbolism carved into the pillars reveals a sophisticated understanding of the natural world and its spiritual significance. The imagery focuses on strong and dangerous animals and seems to be connected to group identities. Lions, snakes, boars, and scorpions weren't just decorative motifs. They likely represented spiritual powers, totemic animals, or mythological beings that held deep significance for the communities that gathered at the site. Perhaps the site was a burial ground or the center of a death cult, the dead laid out on the hillside among the stylized gods and spirits of the afterlife. The association between death and spiritual practice appears throughout these early civilizations, suggesting that the confrontation with mortality was a driving force in the development of religious consciousness. Moving to the Indus Valley, we encounter different spiritual traditions, but equally sophisticated religious practices. A watertight pool called the Great Bath, perched on top of a mound of dirt and held in place with walls of baked brick, is the closest structure Mohenjo-Daro has to a temple. This suggests an ideology based on cleanliness. Wells were found throughout the city, and nearly every house contained a bathing area and drainage system. The emphasis on ritual purity and cleansing at Mohenjo-Daro represents one of humanity's earliest organized approaches to spiritual practice. The Great Bath wasn't just a pool. It was a sacred space where ritual purification took place. The careful engineering required to make it watertight, the steps leading down into it, and its prominent position on the highest mound all suggest that it held central importance in Harappan religious life. The spiritual beliefs of the Harappans are also revealed through their art. The Pashupati seal depicts a figure that closely resembles the Hindu deity Shiva, with a horned headdress, 3 heads, and surrounded by animals including an elephant, tiger, rhinoceros, and buffalo. This suggests that some of the spiritual concepts that would later develop into Hinduism may have their roots in Harappan religious practices. The consistent appearance of the unicorn on Harappan seals suggests a shared spiritual symbol across the entire civilization. This unicorn appears on 1156 seals and sealings out of a total of 1755 found at mature Harappan sites. Such consistency across vast distances and long periods indicates that the unicorn held profound religious significance, possibly representing a supreme deity or cosmic principle. At Kedalyuk, spiritual practice was intimately connected with domestic life and ancestor veneration. As a part of ritual life, the people of Kedalyuk buried their dead within the village. Human remains have been found in pits beneath the floors, and especially beneath hearths, the platforms within the main rooms, and beds. This practice created a spiritual landscape where the living and dead coexisted in the same physical space. The skull cult practices at Kedalyuk reveal sophisticated beliefs about death and the afterlife. In some cases, graves were disturbed and the individual's head removed from the skeleton. These heads may have been used in rituals, as some were found in other areas of the community. Some skulls were plastered and painted with ochre to recreate faces, transforming them into objects of veneration and remembrance. The female figurines found throughout Kedalyuk suggest a religious system that emphasized fertility and feminine power. The idol appears to mimic certain characteristics that match the mother goddess belief common in many early Near East civilizations. These figurines weren't simple art objects, but religious icons that played central roles in spiritual practice and belief. The wall paintings at Kedalyuk often depicted scenes that appear to have religious significance. Some show human figures with arms outstretched in poses that might represent prayer or ritual dance. Others display animals in contexts that suggest mythological or spiritual narratives. These murals transformed ordinary houses into sacred spaces where religious stories were constantly present. The Natufans developed their own unique spiritual practices that reflected their transitional lifestyle between nomadic and settled life. The Natufans were the first to establish formal cemeteries, burying their dead with personal ornaments in designated areas. This represents a crucial development in human spiritual consciousness. The idea that death required special treatment and that the dead deserved their own sacred spaces. The treatment of the dead among the Natufans was complex and spiritually sophisticated. Bodies were tightly flexed before burial and were often placed in baskets or wound and wrapped in reed mats. Disarticulated bones in some graves suggest that bodies may have been exposed in the open air for a time before the bones were gathered and buried. This multi-stage treatment of death suggests elaborate beliefs about the journey from life to death to whatever came after. The practice of dental ablation among the Natufians, the deliberate removal of teeth, appears to have been a spiritual or social marking practice. This body modification wasn't done for practical reasons, but served to mark important life transitions or spiritual states. The willingness to undergo painful procedures for spiritual purposes demonstrates the central importance of religious belief in Natufian life. The musical instruments created by the Natufians also served spiritual purposes. The flutes created sounds similar to those made by birds of prey, possibly used in ceremonies that involved calling upon the spirits of these powerful animals. Music and spirituality were intertwined from the earliest stages of human settlement. These early spiritual traditions established patterns that would influence religious practice for millennia. The emphasis on sacred spaces, the importance of ritual purity, the veneration of ancestors, and the use of animal symbolism all became central elements of later religious systems. The spiritual innovations of these forgotten civilizations provided the foundation upon which all subsequent religions would build. The spiritual revolution that began in places like Göbekli Tepe, Kedalyuk, and the settlements of the Natufians represented humanity's first systematic attempt to understand the meaning of existence. These early spiritual practitioners were uncontent simply to survive. They sought to understand their place in the cosmos, to commune with forces greater than themselves, and to create lasting monuments to their spiritual insights. Perhaps most remarkably, these spiritual traditions developed not in response to urban sophistication, but as expressions of humanity's earliest settled communities. Religion didn't emerge as a luxury of advanced civilization. It was one of the driving forces that made civilization possible. The spiritual yearning that motivated the builders of Göbekli Tepe, the ritual purification practices of the Harappans and the ancestor veneration of Cataluyuk, all demonstrate that from the very beginning of settled life, humans have been spiritual beings seeking meaning beyond the material world. Chapter 9. The Trade Networks. Thousands of years before the Silk Road connected East and West, before Phoenician merchants crossed the Mediterranean, and long before Marco Polo dreamed of reaching Cathay, the world's first global trade networks were already crisscrossing continents. The civilizations that flourished before the pyramids weren't isolated settlements struggling in the wilderness. They were connected nodes in sophisticated commercial networks that moved goods, ideas, and innovations across vast distances. With remarkable efficiency, the Indus Valley Civilization created perhaps the most extensive trade network of the ancient world. The Indus Valley Civilization was among the most extensive and influential ancient societies in the Neolithic Age. Their flourishing trade routes with Egypt and Mesopotamia enabled them to trade raw materials not found in their own region, such as lapis lazuli, a rich blue metamorphic rock exclusively found in northeastern Afghanistan. To appreciate the sophistication of this network, consider the geography involved. Lapis lazuli from the mountains of Afghanistan traveled over 1,500 miles to reach the workshops of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. From there, finished goods made their way to Mesopotamian cities like Ur and Babylon, and eventually to the markets of ancient Egypt. This wasn't casual trade, but organized commerce that required sophisticated systems of transportation, quality, control, and cultural exchange. The standardization that made Indus Valley trade possible was remarkable for its time. The remarkable uniformity of weights and measures throughout the Indus lands implies a strong degree of political and administrative control over a wide area. Trade was extensive and apparently well regulated, providing imported raw materials for use at internal production centers, distributing finished goods throughout the region, and arguably culminating in the establishment of Harappan colonies in both Mesopotamia and Badakhshan. The precision of Harappan weights and measures rivaled anything that would be developed for millennia. The Indus Valley Civilization employed rulers made of ivory for measuring length circa 1500 BCE. The decimal subdivision on the ruler is noteworthy, as it predates the modern metric system by 3,000 years or more. This standardization allowed merchants from different cities and regions to conduct business with confidence, knowing that a weight in Harappa would be the same as a weight in Mohenjo-Daro. The archaeological evidence for this extensive trade network is found throughout the ancient world. The city's wealth and stature is evident in artifacts such as ivory, lapis, carnelian, and gold beads, as well as the baked brick city structures themselves. Ivory from African elephants, carnelian from Gujarat, gold from Karnataka, and lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. The merchants of the Indus Valley were bringing together luxury goods from across the known world. The Harappan seals themselves were crucial tools of international commerce. Seals such as these were used by merchants in the Harappan civilization. Many experts believe that they signified names. These weren't just identification tags, but sophisticated instruments of business that could guarantee authenticity, indicate quality, and facilitate transactions across language barriers. The consistent iconography on these seals created a commercial language that could be understood throughout the trading network. The workshops of the Indus Valley cities were designed for mass production and export. Each time goods were traded, or neighbors entered the gates of the cities to barter, Indus culture was spread. The specialization evident in Harappan crafts, from perfectly standardized pottery to precisely cut stone beads, indicates production that went far beyond local needs. These were export industries designed to supply distant markets with goods that couldn't be produced locally. The maritime aspects of Harappan trade were equally sophisticated. The port city of Lothal featured an artificial harbor connected to the sea by a channel, allowing ships to dock safely regardless of tidal conditions. This engineering marvel enabled the Harappans to maintain regular shipping schedules with ports throughout the Persian Gulf and Arabian Sea. But the Indus Valley wasn't the only civilization developing extensive trade networks. Even the hunter-gatherers at Göbekli Tepe were connected to far-flung trading systems. The site testifies to innovative building techniques, including the integration of frequently decorated T-shaped limestone pillars. The tools and materials found at the site include objects that came from hundreds of miles away, indicating that even these early temple builders were part of regional exchange networks. The obsidian found at Göbekli Tepe came from volcanic sources in central Anatolia, requiring organized trade relationships that moved precious stoneworking materials across hundreds of miles of difficult terrain. The effort required to transport these materials suggests that they held special significance, perhaps religious or ceremonial importance, that made the long-distance trade worthwhile. At Cataluyuk, the trade in obsidian reached industrial proportions. The nearby Taurus Mountains yielded obsidian volcanic glass that could be knapped into incredibly sharp tools and weapons. Cataluyuk became a center for obsidian working, with craftsmen producing tools that were traded across the ancient world. The settlement's prosperity was built on this trade, with obsidian tools from Cataluyuk found at archaeological sites throughout the Middle East. The obsidian trade from Cataluyuk demonstrates how specialized production and long-distance trade could transform entire communities. The settlement developed sophisticated techniques for working obsidian, creating tools that were superior to anything available locally. This technological advantage created demand across vast regions, bringing wealth and exotic goods back to Cataluyuk in exchange. The quality control evident in obsidian production at Cataluyuk was remarkable. Tools had to meet exacting standards to compete in distant markets, requiring master craftsmen who could produce consistent, high-quality goods. The training of these specialists and the maintenance of quality standards across generations represents a significant achievement in early industrial organization. Even the Natufians, despite their hunter-gatherer lifestyle, participated in extensive trade networks. The Mediterranean shells found at inland Natufian sites came from coastal regions hundreds of miles away. These shells weren't just decorative objects, but valuable trade goods that connected the Natufians to maritime cultures and distant economies. The movement of shells from the Mediterranean coast to inland Natufian settlements required organized trade, relationships that crossed ecological and cultural boundaries. Coastal peoples had to establish relationships with inland groups, develop systems for transporting fragile goods across difficult terrain, and create mechanisms for determining fair exchange rates between very different types of products. The Natufian trade networks also moved ideas and innovations. The sickle technology that allowed efficient harvesting of wild grains spread rapidly across the Natufian world, suggesting communication networks that could transmit technical knowledge as effectively as they moved physical goods. This exchange of information may have been even more valuable than the movement of material objects. The social implications of these early trade networks were profound. Trade required trust between strangers, standardized systems of measurement and value, and mechanisms for resolving disputes across cultural boundaries. The development of these systems represents some of humanity's first experiments in international relations and commercial law. The cultural exchange, facilitated by trade, was equally important. The imagery found at Göbekli Tepe, adorning to pillars, and some small finds, is also found at contemporaneous sites in the upper Mesopotamian region, thus testifying to a close social network in this core region of Neolithization. Trade networks didn't just move goods, they spread artistic styles, religious concepts, and technological innovations. The seasonal nature of much ancient trade created rhythms that governed entire societies. Zooarchaeological analysis shows that gazelle were only seasonally present in the region, suggesting that events such as rituals and feasts were likely timed to occur during periods when game availability was at its peak. Trade expeditions were often coordinated with these seasonal gatherings, creating annual cycles of commerce and cultural exchange. The infrastructure required to support these trade networks was extensive. Roads had to be maintained, way stations established, and safe passage guaranteed across tribal territories. The coordination required to maintain these systems across such vast distances, without modern communication technology, represents a remarkable achievement in organization and diplomacy. The decline of these early civilizations often coincided with the disruption of their trade networks. Eventually, though, around 1900 BCE, this prosperity came to an end. The integrated cultural network collapsed, and the civilization became fragmented into smaller regional cultures. Trade, writing, and seals all but disappeared from the area. The interconnected nature of these early economies meant that disruption in one area could have cascading effects across the entire network. The legacy of these ancient trade networks extends far beyond their immediate economic impact. They establish principles of international commerce that remain relevant today: standardization, quality control, trust-based relationships, and cultural exchange. They demonstrated that even the earliest human settlements were not isolated entities, but part of broader networks of connection and exchange. Merchants and traders who created these networks were among humanity's first international citizens, crossing cultural and linguistic boundaries to create connections that enriched all participants. Their legacy reminds us that the impulse toward connection and exchange has been with humanity from the very beginning of settled life, driving innovation, spreading knowledge, and creating the foundations for all subsequent global commerce. Chapter 10. Mysterious Collapse. One of history's greatest mysteries isn't what these ancient civilizations achieved, it's why they vanished. The societies that had thrived for millennia, built magnificent cities, and created sophisticated cultures, suddenly began to collapse around 1900 BCE. The reasons for their decline remain hotly debated, but their disappearance offers profound lessons about the fragility of even the most successful civilizations and the factors that determine their long-term survival. The collapse of the Indus Valley civilization is perhaps the most puzzling of all ancient mysteries. It remains unclear how the Indus civilization came to an end, and its decline was probably not uniform. By the middle of the second millennium BCE, the city of Mohenjo-Daro was already dying and was dealt a final blow by invaders from the north. The civilization's southernmost parts, by contrast, may have continued until Iron Age civilization developed in India, about 1000 BCE. The gradual nature of the Indus Valley decline makes it even more mysterious. A gradual drying of the region during the third millennium BCE may have been the initial stimulus for its urbanization. Eventually, it also reduced the water supply enough to cause the civilization's demise, and to disperse its population to the east. Climate change appears to have played a crucial role, but the civilization had survived climate variations before. Why did this particular change prove fatal? The evidence from Mohenjo-Daro tells a story of slow decline rather than sudden catastrophe. When the Indus civilization went into sudden decline c. 1900 BCE, Mohenjo-Daro was abandoned. The ruins of the city remained undocumented for around 3,700 years until R.D. Banerjee visited the site in 1919-20. The city wasn't destroyed by war or natural disaster. It was simply left empty as its inhabitants departed for unknown destinations. The suggested causes for the Indus Valley collapse revealed the multiple vulnerabilities that ancient civilizations faced. Kenner suggests that the Indus River changed course, which would have hampered the local agricultural economy and the city's importance as a center of trade. River course changes were common in the dynamic landscape of the Indus Valley, but this particular change may have been more severe or occurred at a time when the civilization was already stressed by other factors. The role of climate change in the collapse cannot be overstated. The early Harappan period coincided with favorable climate conditions that supported both agriculture and trade. As the climate became more arid, the carefully balanced systems that supported large populations began to fail. Wells ran dry, crops failed, and the surplus that had supported urban specialists disappeared. But climate change alone doesn't explain the completeness of the collapse. A changing river course doesn't explain the collapse of the entire Indus civilization. Throughout the valley, the culture changed. What drives that, nobody knows. The uniformity that had been the civilization's strength may have become its weakness. When the central systems failed, there were no alternative models to fall back on. The collapse at Göbekli Tepe presents a different but equally mysterious scenario. Around 8000 BCE, someone deliberately buried the entire site. It wasn't destroyed by war, abandoned naturally, or covered by time. It was intentionally filled in with dirt and hidden. The enormous effort required to bury these massive structures suggests that this wasn't random abandonment but a deliberate decision by the community. Several theories attempt to explain why Göbekli Tepe was deliberately buried. Maybe the culture that built it faded away, and new people didn't like what it stood for. The rise of agricultural communities may have made the hunter-gatherer religious practices at Göbekli Tepe seem obsolete or even threatening. The new farmers may have wanted to literally bury the old ways of life. Another possibility is that the burial of Göbekli Tepe was itself a religious act. Perhaps the completion of the site's spiritual purpose required its concealment, transforming it from an active temple into a sacred burial mound. This would represent a sophisticated understanding of symbolic closure and transformation. The abandonment of Cataluyuk followed a different pattern, reflecting the unique challenges faced by this experimental urban form. Its later period coincided with the Copper Age, which began around 5500 BC. In this later phase, the eastern mound was abandoned, and the western mound developed. The rooftop-based circulation system that had worked for centuries may have become impractical as the settlement grew larger and more complex. The social stresses in Cataluyuk's final period are evident in the archaeological record. The egalitarian society that had characterized the settlement's early period began to show signs of increasing inequality and social tension. Larger houses, more elaborate burials, and evidence of resource hoarding suggest that the cooperative principles that had sustained the community were breaking down. The technological changes of the Copper Age may have undermined Cataluyuk's economic foundation. As metal tools became available, the obsidian trade that had brought prosperity to the settlement became less valuable. Communities that had depended on Cataluyuk for stone tools could now produce superior metal implements locally dotted Jericho. The pattern was different again, demonstrating how local factors could determine the fate of even well-established settlements. In 6000 BC, a major earthquake shifted or interrupted the spring of Ain Sultan, likely causing the end of Neolithic Jericho. The water source that had sustained the city for thousands of years was disrupted, making continued habitation impossible. The earthquake at Jericho highlights the vulnerability of early cities to natural disasters. Despite their walls, their accumulated wealth, and their thousands of years of experience, these settlements remained at the mercy of geological and climatological forces beyond their control. The same geographic features that made locations attractive for settlement, river valleys, springs, fertile plains, also made them vulnerable to natural disasters. The Nachafian culture faced different challenges as the world around them changed. Many believe that the decline of the Harappan civilization was a result of Aryan invasions from the north. This theory seems logical because the Aryans came to power in the Ganges Valley shortly after the Indus demise of the Indus Valley civilization. The arrival of new peoples with different technologies and social systems may have disrupted the delicate balance that had sustained Nachafian communities, but the Nachafian transformation may have been less a collapse than an evolution. The Natufians represented a transitional phase between hunter-gatherer and agricultural societies. As full agricultural techniques developed, Nachafian communities may have gradually adopted the new technologies and social systems, transforming themselves rather than disappearing. The lessons from these ancient collapses remain relevant today. Climate change, resource depletion, social inequality, technological disruption, and natural disasters, all the factors that contributed to ancient collapses, continue to threaten modern civilizations. The difference is that today's challenges are global in scope, and there are fewer places to retreat when systems fail. The uniformity that made the Indus Valley civilization so successful also made it vulnerable to systematic collapse. When the central systems failed, there were no alternative models to fall back on. Modern globalization creates similar vulnerabilities. The interconnectedness that brings prosperity also ensures that crises can spread rapidly across the entire system. The deliberate burial of Göbekli Tepe suggests that ancient peoples understood the importance of symbolic closure and transformation. Modern societies might benefit from similar wisdom about when to abandon failing systems and how to honor what came before while embracing necessary change. The experimental nature of Puriforer, Jordkommen, liker av vire som nämligen five infinite to five fentempt. The experimental nature of from similar wisdom of Fosfalazinker Sims, and how to honor what came before while locating seeing necessary change. The experimental nature of us. Cataluyuk's urban form reminds us that there are many ways to organize human settlements. The community's eventual adoption of more conventional urban patterns suggests that some experiments, however fascinating, may not be sustainable in the long term. But the willingness to experiment remains crucial for adaptation and survival. Perhaps, most importantly, these ancient collapses remind us that no civilization, however successful or sophisticated, is permanent. The cities that once dominated their regions are now archaeological sites visited by tourists. The trade networks that connected continents became forgotten footnotes in history. The technological innovations that seemed revolutionary became obsolete curiosities. But the collapse of these civilizations wasn't the end of human progress. It was part of the ongoing process of adaptation and renewal that has characterized human development from the beginning. The lessons learned from these failures contributed to the success of later civilizations, and the innovations they developed were rediscovered and improved by their Successors. The ultimate lesson of these ancient collapses may be the importance of resilience, adaptability, and humility in the face of forces beyond our control. The civilizations that lasted longest weren't necessarily the most powerful or sophisticated, but those that could adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining their essential character and values. Chapter 11. The Legacy. As we stand today in the shadow of skyscrapers and navigate through digital networks that span the globe, it's easy to assume that human sophistication is a recent achievement. But the forgotten civilizations that flourished before the pyramids tell a different story, one of ancient wisdom, remarkable innovation, and fundamental insights about human nature that continue to shape our world thousands of years after their builders turned to dust. The legacy of these ancient civilizations extends far beyond archaeological curiosities or tourist destinations. The innovations they developed, the problems they solved, and the social experiments they conducted laid the foundation for everything that followed. From the sewage systems beneath our modern cities to the democratic principles that govern our societies, the influence of these forgotten builders continues to flow through the veins of human civilization. Consider the urban planning principles, first developed in the Indus Valley over 4,000 years ago. The well-planned street grid and elaborate drainage system that characterize Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa established templates for city design that remain relevant today. Modern urban planners still grapple with the same fundamental challenges that the Harappans solved: how to provide clean water to large populations, how to remove waste efficiently, and how to create livable communities that balance individual needs with collective welfare. The standardization that enabled Harappan civilization to function across vast distances prefigured the global standards that make modern international commerce possible. The remarkable uniformity of weights and measures throughout the Indus lands established principles of precision and consistency that modern manufacturing and trade still depend upon. When we use standardized shipping containers, universal time zones, or international currency exchange rates, we're following patterns first established by these ancient merchants. The engineering innovations of these early civilizations continue to inspire modern solutions to contemporary problems. The passive cooling systems developed at Cataluyuk, those wind catchers that provided air conditioning without mechanical systems, are being rediscovered by architects seeking sustainable alternatives to energy-intensive climate control. The precision water management systems of the Indus Valley offer models for modern cities struggling with water scarcity and aging infrastructure. But perhaps the most profound legacy of these civilizations lies not in their technologies, but in their social innovations. The egalitarian society of Cataluyuk, where houses varied little in size and there were no obvious centers of power, demonstrated that large communities could function without rigid hierarchies or authoritarian control. This experiment in cooperative living offers valuable insights for modern societies seeking alternatives to extreme inequality and concentrated power. The peaceful nature of Harappan civilization provides an alternative model for international relations. Amazingly, the Indus Valley civilization appears to have been a peaceful one. Very few weapons have been found and no evidence of an army has been discovered. In an era when military expenditure consumes vast resources while social problems go unsolved, the Harappan example suggests that prosperity and security can be achieved through cooperation rather than conflict. The religious innovations that began at sites like Göbekli Tepe established patterns of spiritual practice that continue to influence modern faith traditions. The emphasis on sacred spaces, ritual purification, ancestor veneration, and the use of symbolic art all became fundamental elements of later religions. When people gather in houses of worship today, participate in ceremonial rituals, or seek spiritual meaning through sacred symbols, They're following practices that began with those first temple builders in ancient Anatolia. The artistic achievements of these civilizations remind us that the drive to create beauty and meaning isn't a luxury of advanced societies, but a fundamental human need. The sophisticated sculptures, intricate carvings, and elaborate murals they created demonstrate that from the very beginning of settled life, humans have sought to express their deepest thoughts and feelings through art. This understanding has profound implications for how we value and support creative expression in modern societies. The trade networks developed by these ancient civilizations establish principles of international commerce that remain relevant in our globalized world. The trust-based relationships, quality control systems, and cultural exchange mechanisms they developed provided the foundation for all subsequent international trade. When modern businesses negotiate contracts across cultural boundaries, maintain quality standards across global supply chains, or build brand recognition in foreign markets, they're using techniques pioneered by these ancient merchants. The mysterious collapses that ended these civilizations offer crucial warnings about the fragility of complex societies. The climate change that may have doomed the Indus Valley, the social stresses that transformed Cataluyuk, and the natural disasters that struck Jericho all provide sobering reminders about forces that continue to threaten modern civilization. Understanding how these ancient societies responded to crisis, both successfully and unsuccessfully, can inform our own approaches to contemporary challenges. The deliberate burial of Göbekli Tepe suggests that these ancient peoples understood something we often forget, that some endings are necessary for new beginnings. The wisdom to recognize when systems have outlived their usefulness and the courage to make necessary changes, even when they involve abandoning cherished traditions, remains as relevant today as it was 10,000 years ago. Perhaps most importantly, these civilizations demonstrate the remarkable consistency of human nature across vast spans of time. The people who built Göbekli Tepe designed the drainage systems of Mohenjo-Daro and created the cooperative society of Cataluyuk faced the same fundamental challenges we face today: how to live together peacefully, how to create meaning and beauty in life, how to manage resources sustainably, and how to adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining essential values. Their solutions weren't always perfect, and their civilizations ultimately didn't survive in their original forms. But their experiments in human organization provide a rich catalog of possibilities that can inform our own efforts to build better societies. They remind us that current arrangements aren't inevitable, and that humans have always been capable of remarkable creativity in solving social and technical problems. The archaeological discoveries that revealed these civilizations to the modern world continue to reshape our understanding of human capabilities and potential. Each new excavation, each decoded symbol, each analyzed artifact adds to our knowledge of what humans have achieved and what we might achieve again. The ongoing research at sites like Göbekli Tepe, where only 5% has been excavated, promises to yield new insights that will further expand our understanding of human history and potential. The greatest legacy of these forgotten civilizations may be the humility they inspire. When we realize that sophisticated urban planning, advanced engineering, peaceful international relations, and profound spiritual insights were achieved by people using stone tools and human muscle power, we're reminded that technology alone doesn't determine human achievement. Intelligence, creativity, cooperation, and wisdom have always been the most important tools for building successful societies. As we face contemporary challenges, climate change, inequality, resource depletion, social fragmentation, the folly. Examples set by these ancient civilizations offer both inspiration and practical guidance. They show us that humans have always been capable of remarkable innovation and adaptation. They remind us that some of our most pressing problems have been solved before, using different technologies, but similar ingenuity and determination. The story of these forgotten civilizations ultimately tells us that we are part of a much longer and richer human story than we often realize. The cities we live in, the technologies we use, the social arrangements we take for granted, and even the spiritual beliefs we hold all have roots that extend back to these ancient innovators. Understanding this continuity can help us appreciate both how far we've come and how much wisdom we can still learn from those who came before. Their legacy echoes through time, not as a relic of the past, but as a living influence on the present and future. Every time we turn on a tap and expect clean water to flow, every time we navigate city streets laid out in orderly grids, every time we participate in democratic decision-making or gather for spiritual purposes, we're benefiting from innovations first developed by these remarkable ancient peoples. The forgotten civilizations that existed before the pyramids weren't primitive precursors to real civilization. They were sophisticated societies that solved fundamental human problems and created lasting innovations that continue to benefit us today. Their story is our story, and their legacy is our inheritance. Understanding their achievements and learning from their experiences isn't just academically interesting. It's essential for creating a better future for ourselves and generations to come. Consider the urban planning principles first developed in the Indus Valley over 4,000 years ago, where the sophisticated minds of Harappan engineers created solutions that would make modern city planners pause in admiration. The well-planned street grid and elaborate drainage system that characterize Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa didn't emerge by accident or gradual evolution. They represented deliberate, systematic approaches to urban design that established templates for city planning that remain strikingly relevant in our contemporary metropolitan landscapes. These ancient urban planners face challenges that mirror our own with uncanny precision. How do you provide clean, reliable water access to dense populations numbering in the tens of thousands? How do you efficiently remove waste without creating public health disasters? How do you design transportation networks that facilitate commerce while maintaining residential quality of life? How do you balance individual property rights with collective infrastructure needs? The Harappans confronted each of these questions with innovative solutions that demonstrate remarkable foresight and engineering sophistication. The street layout of Mohenjo-Daro reveals a master plan that prioritized both functionality and livability. The main thoroughfares ran precisely north-south and east-west, creating a rational grid system that maximized traffic flow while providing clear orientation for residents and visitors. These weren't narrow, winding paths that developed organically over time, but deliberately planned arteries wide enough for carts and large groups of people. Secondary streets connected residential areas to commercial districts with logical efficiency, while smaller lanes provided access to individual homes without disrupting major traffic patterns. But the true genius of Harappan urban planning lay beneath the surface in their revolutionary approach to water management and waste disposal. Every major building connected to an intricate network of covered drains constructed from precisely fitted bricks and mortar. These drainage channels weren't simple open gutters, but engineered systems with manholes for maintenance, settling tanks for debris removal, and carefully calculated gradients to ensure proper flow rates. The sophistication rivals modern sewage systems, with some innovations that contemporary engineers are only now rediscovering. The water supply system demonstrated equally impressive planning. Public wells provided clean water at regular intervals throughout the city, positioned to serve surrounding neighborhoods while maintaining sanitary distance from waste disposal areas. Private wells within larger homes connected to the same aquifer management system, ensuring consistent water quality and pressure throughout the urban area. The waterproofing techniques used in the Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro, involving layers of bitumen and carefully fitted stone blocks, created structures that remain watertight for millennia. Modern urban planners studying these ancient cities find solutions to contemporary problems that seem almost prophetic. The Harappan practice of elevating buildings above flood levels speaks directly to modern concerns about climate adaptation and flood management. Their integration of commercial and residential areas created walkable neighborhoods that reduced transportation needs, a concept modern planners call mixed-use development and promote as cutting-edge sustainable design. The standardization that enabled Harappan civilization to function across vast distances established principles that prefigured our globalized economy. The remarkable uniformity of brick sizes, weight measurements, and architectural standards throughout Indus Valley cities demonstrates quality control systems that modern manufacturing still emulates. When construction materials met identical specifications across hundreds of miles, it enabled efficient resource allocation, simplified maintenance, and facilitated the movement of skilled workers between projects. This standardization extended beyond mere convenience to create the foundation for complex economic systems. Identical weights and measures enabled fair trade across cultural and linguistic boundaries. Standardized currency systems allowed merchants to calculate values quickly and accurately. Uniform building codes ensured that infrastructure investments in one city could be replicated successfully in another. These innovations established patterns of precision and consistency that modern international commerce depends upon fundamentally. When contemporary architects design shipping containers to universal specifications, establish international building codes, or create standardized time zones for global coordination, they're following organizational principles first established by these ancient urban planners. The Harappan legacy lives not just in archaeological sites, but in the fundamental assumptions about how large-scale human settlements should function, assumptions so deeply embedded in our thinking that we rarely recognize their ancient origins. Engineering innovations of these early civilizations continue inspiring modern solutions to pressing contemporary challenges. The passive cooling systems developed at Cataluyuk, those ingenious wind catchers that channeled natural air currents to provide comfortable indoor temperatures without mechanical systems, are being rediscovered by architects seeking sustainable alternatives to energy-intensive climate control. The precision water management systems of the Indus Valley offer proven models for modern cities struggling with water scarcity, aging infrastructure, and the mounting costs of centralized utilities management. As our journey through these forgotten worlds comes to an end, we're left with a profound realization. The story of human civilization is far more ancient, complex, and remarkable than we ever imagined. From the towering pillars of Göbekli Tepe to the sophisticated sewers of Mohenjo-Daro, from the rooftop cities of Cataluyuk to the walls of ancient Jericho, these civilizations achieved what was supposedly impossible. They created advanced societies before civilization was supposed to begin. These weren't primitive experiments, but sophisticated solutions to fundamental human challenges. They developed urban planning principles we still use today, created trade networks that spanned continents, and established spiritual traditions that continue to influence modern faith. Most remarkably, they demonstrated that humans have always possessed the intelligence, creativity, and cooperation necessary to build extraordinary societies. The questions we posed at the beginning of our journey have been answered, but they've also opened new mysteries. We now know that human civilization began much earlier than textbooks suggested, but we're still discovering how extensive and sophisticated these early achievements were. We understand that religion, art, and urban planning weren't late additions to human development, but may have been the driving forces that made civilization possible in the first place. These ancient innovators faced the same Fundamental challenges we face today: how to live together peacefully, manage resources sustainably, create meaning and beauty in life, and adapt to changing circumstances. Their solutions weren't always perfect, and their civilizations didn't survive unchanged. But their experiments in human organization provide a rich catalog of possibilities that can inform our own efforts to build better societies. Perhaps most importantly, these forgotten civilizations remind us that we are part of a much longer and richer human story. The sophisticated achievements of our ancestors, accomplished with stone tools and human ingenuity, humble our technological pride and inspire our human potential. They show us that true advancement isn't just about having better tools, but about wisdom, cooperation, and the courage to experiment with new ways of living. As we face our own contemporary challenges, we can draw inspiration from these ancient problem solvers who turned deserts into gardens, organized peaceful societies of tens of thousands, and created beauty that still moves us across the millennia. Their legacy reminds us that human potential has deep roots, and that the future we build together can be every bit as remarkable as the achievements of these magnificent forgotten civilizations. The story continues, and we are its next chapter.